Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team at The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. In this episode, we'll be looking into the future and discussing what should be different in the world of learning. I am delighted to welcome Michaela Adams to the podcast. Thank you for joining us, Michaela. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me. So I'm Michaela. Let's start off with my L&D credentials for your discerning listeners. My first L&D job was back with Hilton Hotels, way back, and I was a trainer for them. And that was actually a really great place to start. It gave me a good grounding of everything about learning and development and what that really could be. I do believe they are still to this day world class, and I carry a lot of me personally with what I learned at Hilton and with what I learned from my first learning and development manager, Andrew Stotter Brooks. He was still is an inspirational manager. And a lot of how I do L&D is thanks to him. One of the best things he ever taught me was balloon making, but we'll save that for another conversation. From there, I've progressed from training to more training design roles, and then have continued to kind of grow skills in organizational design and development and internal consultancy. In terms of industries, because people are people everywhere, we challenge ourselves by changing industry. So I worked in finance, e-commerce, digital transformation, and now I've somehow ended up working for the Cayman Islands government. I thought that could be a good story to tell in the future, to live out the COVID years in the Caribbean. And Cayman was actually free of COVID for a first year that I was here while the UK was still in lockdown. So since moving here, on a personal note, I appreciate sunsets a lot more. And I did my first ever charity sea swim. I swam a whole mile in the sea, which is pretty easy when it's warm and still. So there you go, a few little personal details about me as well.
Well, nice eclectic background. I know we're going to come back to that sort of later in the podcast, and feeling massively jealous that you managed to spend that lockdown period in the Caymans. And yeah, I was stuck in a flat in London, so no envy there at all. But we both connected sort of back a while ago when the CIPD ran a hackathon, and they were looking at the future of HR. And I know there were sort of lots of synergies between us in our thinking, and a real desire to make a difference in the world of HR and certainly the world of learning. So that was what I wanted to pick up with you today, and really sort of look as to what should be the future of learning, what are the possibilities, what should we be aiming for. But before we dive into that, let's start with, what is the point of learning and development?
Oh, I love that you start with the easy questions, James. Don't we spend our lives trying to justify that to the business? And it always gets me that finance never has to write a business case for why they exist. Just before I get into that, just a note on that hackathon, because that was really inspiring. I'm a social learner. So when you meet with other people who can have difference of opinion and who are such a diverse, but you've got that combined passion, that's where things really start to come into place. So yeah, I loved that. All right, but back to the question. The purpose of learning and development. I wish I didn't have to spend, honestly, 80% of my job trying to explain the purpose of learning and development to other people, and I could actually spend my time doing the purpose of learning and development. And that says that there's something wrong with the legacy, perhaps, or honestly, if I'd have figured out why it is that we have to spend so much time convincing other people, then I would be rich right now. People tell us in engagement surveys all the time, learning and development, career progression, people aren't happy enough. They're not satisfied enough with it. And just those two things alone, it can really impact people's mood, impact their engagement, and how long they might actually stay with an organization and what they bring to an organization. So, all right, I'm going to try and sum it up in one sentence, and I'm pinching this from Leadership Development Limited, a company that I worked with way back in my early days, and they had this mantra: capable, confident, strong. And to this day, I see that as the purpose of learning and development, to help individuals, teams, and organizations feel capable, confident, and strong for now and for the future. And I'm not afraid to put the word feel in there, because when people feel better, they perform better. And if they're capable, they're efficient. If they're confident, they deliver. And if they're strong, then they're resilient, and that will help the organizations grow that capability that they need to help them right now and to help them moving into whatever comes in the future.
I love that. It's a nice succinct summation, because like you said, I like you have spent much of my career spending the majority of my hours fighting for the space to do your job, and then limited time actually doing the job, and having, you know, something so succinct as that to be able to take and use as a way of presenting the function and the value to the business back. I really like that. I think it's a nice little snippet that, you know, our listeners can take and weave into their own little toolkit of how they get the business to buy into what they're trying to help the business achieve. So in light of what you've articulated, imagine you could go back to a completely blank canvas for learning and development and take that purpose. What would that look like? What would you design?
Imagine having no legacy issues to deal with. First off, I'm not the kind of person that can sit and design that by myself. I said to you, I'm very much a social thinker. So, hey, why not start off with a hackathon and get lots of people's opinion, get all of the different diverse thinking about stuff. I've been reading a lot over the past couple of years about how, you know, I remember, it's funny when you see the trends go through in learning and development, because I remember getting all excited when our team was called the employee experience team instead of the learning and development team. And I was like, yeah, this is something different. This is something new. But now, actually, and especially COVID has helped this, we're talking about employee co-creation. People want to be designing what their workplace looks like, what their work looks like. They want to actually have a hand in that. I'm not saying they can do it by themselves, but with the right facilitators and the right systems. So to start designing what learning and development would be like, definitely putting the learners and our employees in the center of all of that. I've seen examples, I know we've spoken in the past, but examples of when people design things and it goes wrong because they haven't consulted the people that are actually using it. I can talk from hotel days. I've seen where the hotel only had one lift. So that lift had to be used by everybody, from room service food to the cleaning carts and the guests in it all at the same time. Makes no sense. If you'd have spoken to anybody in the hotel industry, they would have recommended, why don't you have a back of house lift and a front of house lift? Most do, but not all of them. Or I've seen a bar where people, it's right in the middle of the room and they can't close the drinks in. So at the beginning and end of every shift, the bar staff have to place the bottles on one by one and take them off one by one, and just the time that involves. And if you think about how in the workplace, if we're not involving learners, if we're not really understanding our learners, how can we design something for them? So to build something from scratch, I'm generally quite futuristic. So I have to consider and force myself to remember the context. How did learning and development start? It started off as training, the need to pass on information from one to many, right? But since then, yeah, okay, we've moved to e-learning, we've moved to more just-in-time learning, but there's still a lot of this click, 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 click. I'm not really absorbing it. Oh no, there's a test. Oh, that's fairly easy to test. What have I learned? What have I applied? So looking at building what we need, I start by thinking, well, what are the skills that people ask of me? Because that's what people need, right? So that's diagnosing the future. People really struggle to think about what skills they might need in the future. And actually, I've worked in very few workplaces, had the privilege of working in a few, that are truly agile. Okay, we tend to be reactive and we're focusing on the short-term needs. So we lose that long-term thinking. So long-term thinking would have to be in there. And that bigger context of stuff. Training doesn't work in isolation. The context of stuff. One of my biggest bugbears is people go on leadership training, but we haven't really done the analysis of whether or not they can apply it, if their managers are willing to delegate them stuff, or, you know, they'll go away, they'll learn something, and then they go back and they're not yet a manager, and they get more frustrated because they see their manager doing the opposite of what they've just learned that they should do as a good manager. And then by the time they maybe are promoted to a manager, it was so long ago, the training, they've forgotten it. So that whole context is forgotten, as well as that whole systems thinking around it. And I think another thing that we bring as L&D professionals is that calmness, because we are not being judged on that role, or because we don't have the same pressures that people in those roles have. We're able to step back and think more logically about solutions and come up with better solutions that encompass, like I say, the big picture thinking. I'm coach a lot it's a lot about building confidence for people. People generally know what they want to do. For some reason, they're just fearful. And I wish I could just bottle up a little potion of, hey, you got this, and give it to people and see what they could do. I think, wow, we would have workplaces that fly. And really, we're, guardians of people's energy and well-being. I once got asked if I was a happiness monitor, was that my job? Because they thought, I just go around checking in that everybody's happy. But there is value in people feeling well. And it was years ago again, I still remember, and I think it was a workshop by the corporate hippie, and she talked about how people, for a long time, we've been looking after people's physical well-being in the workplace. And then, more recently, we're starting to look at their mental well-being in the workplace, but we still don't really address spiritual well-being. And spiritual well-being, that can mean different things to different people. For me, it means community, it means purpose. A lot of people think they don't have to belong at work. And I think that's really sad because we spend so much time there. A lot of people see it as just a job and then they go home to their real life and their friends. And I just think that's a missed opportunity based on how much time we spend there. So I was thinking of the skills that we have, and then I was thinking, how can we readdress job titles to try and attract people to come and work for us, to really know what they're doing? So I had an apprentice once that was an absolutely amazing L&D person at such a young age, Jared, and he could change the mood in a room even when it was full of more senior people than him. So why not create something like a social influencer? Somebody that goes around influencing the mood and the feelings of people, helping people come together and have better conversations, mediating stuff. And I'm sure getting together with other people, we could think up much more creative things, but learning experience architect, performance consultant, learning analytics strategist, or organizational futurist. Can't we just be a bit more creative than learning and development administrator, learning and development business partner, learning and development manager? What do they really mean? People don't always know what those mean. Let's be really targeted and specific. And I think another key thing is make L&D sit within the business, not within HR. Whenever I've started a new job, I've gone out and I've worked in different teams, and I've really tried to understand what it is they do, have a go at their job, because how can I help them learn if I don't know what their starting point is and what their gaps are and who they are and what they do? So being out in the business, not being somebody that sits on the side and provides content from time to time. And that brings the shift in between, I call learning and development what I do, mainly because I've always been kind of a standalone learning and development, and I've always naturally done organizational design and development. And I'm not fussy about titles, but I do appreciate there's a time and a place to distinguish between people's skill sets and what they can do. But I think learning and development and organizational design and development should more often be working together than I see that they are right now. And the Association for Talent Development, they had a brilliant article on the bridge between L&D and OD, and it looks at what are the shared problems that we're asked to solve, because I think there's a lot that we have in common, but a lot we're still bringing separately to the conversation. So sum up some of those things: learner-centered. I haven't talked about data-driven. I mean, that's a really big one as well. That helps define your purpose and get your seat at the table, doesn't it? But really building that learning culture. And it's, still so much more beyond training. We still talk about training in our profession and in the businesses. And I'm like, didn't we know years and years ago we are so much more than training? But I think the brand, that can still be the legacy stuff. So if we don't have that legacy stuff, let's go in, let's change up some job descriptions, and let's reimagine something that can really attract people into our profession.
So it sounds to me, just sort of listening to that, lots and lots in there, but trying to take a step back and see what I take from what you've just said. So almost feels like the positioning of the function and almost the naming and branding of the function wouldn't be learning. It would be something almost completely different, not aligned to HR, aligned to, more business performance, and thinking about being able to shape the contextual shape of that business. So, where you're talking about org design and things like that, that's more around looking out beyond just what you do, but actually shaping that environment. Because you talked about, the leaders or other people who come on training courses and go back in and find that training is not even just away from just in time training. It's never going to be able to training because there is no culture that, as you illustrated, allows them to put that into practice. And I think where most people in learning are talking about design, they're probably back into those vanity type things of the hotel example you gave. So, someone who's designed a bar that looks absolutely perfect and amazing and would be great on Instagram, but takes, like you said, 3 hours to set up and 3 hours to take down every day. You're back to that of saying, what is it we're really here to do, and getting some very practical delivery points. But it's, from what I'm hearing from you, it's more about that positioning of the function and not being pushed down into just delivering knowledge, which is something that anyone can do. The reality is, some of the stuff I've seen on generative AI now, some of the tools are there to push content together. Some of the tools you can write in and go, right, I want a health and safety course for hotels, and it will pull you together a load of generic content, health and safety stuff for hotels. You just put a couple of contextual pieces in the middle, that's done. So those bits of our job should be going away with tech, and it shouldn't be making us redundant. It should be pushing us into this space you talked about of being that sort of social influencer or the facilitator or some of those other roles you touched upon.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your question that you asked before, and I think we should ask ourselves this more and on a daily basis. What is our purpose? And if we are not able to really say what is our purpose and measure and review and evaluate how we are adding that value, and I know people say that's hard for L&D because how can we justify it solely based on that one thing? But there are things that you can do. So if you're not sure how to do that, reach out to peers, or AI, maybe they'll have some good answers for you there that you can then take into conversations, but use it intelligently, use it to help you move forward with what you're trying to do for your business. Because ultimately that's what we want our businesses to be successful.
Yeah, and you should be spending your time in the value-adding activities, not the generic stuff that you can get from elsewhere or that someone else can help you with, or reinventing the wheel just to make it that 1% more localized or more contextualized to you. Putting your company logos on some generic materials is not particularly value-adding. What is value-adding is influencing how easily those can be absorbed in your business or impacting the culture, or looking at what contextually is different for your business. And I think, again, people lose sight of that, why they're there and what's the focus and what's the benefit they're meant to drive for the individuals. Going back to your capable, confident and strong, if they have that or some other guiding light that's saying, is what I'm doing now really going to help a step change in us achieving those things, or my own purpose or my business's purpose? And be surprising how much of the work you do is not doing those things, or potentially is unfortunately trying to even create the space for the L&D team or learning function to do whatever it is they're meant to do.
Yeah, another big revelation I had during my learning and development career was when I did my CIPD training, and I realized, it's not all about best practice. There's this thing called best fit. And I still see a lot of people, especially again, those that have been on management training courses, they come back full of management 101. We must do something fun. We must have a team building. We must do all these things, but without really having the purpose about it. Or let's not force a team building or even like a fun event on somebody if their processes or their systems are making their days miserable ones, So it really is about trying to fit those things in for people. Do things in a coherent way that actually help. We don't have to put big fancy words in there. Let's be helpful. Let's add value, like you said.
And, to that point, it doesn't need to be purist. It doesn't need to be purist and models and following things. If you get people to outline what it is they're there to achieve, there are 101 ways of achieving that and what's contextually going to work in your area. And we should all be stealing best fit ideas, because there's no such thing as best practice. People will ask us what's the best for this, and it's like contextually you have to tell me more about your problem, because there is no way there is a one size fits all. We were exhibiting at the Learning Tech exhibition last week, and we still have people come up and ask us what's the best learning technology, and my response is normally, well, what's the best pair of shoes? And you see people looking at you, and I'm like, well, without an additional set of questions, how can you answer that? Are you running the 100 meters, or are you going to a works do? Are you going to, the Oscars, or are you doing this or that or the other? You probably wear different footwear for each of those things. In the same way, without working out the context and purpose of what you're doing, there is no generic answers or off the shelf stuff that's going to apply. So just challenging yourself back, but the fact people still ask those questions almost makes me think people are on autopilot, or they aren't maybe taking as much thought as they could do around thinking about that impact.
Yeah, I think it's about, again, what are the blockers that these people have? Because, we know management is easy. There's enough management books out there. Create a clear vision, communicate well with people, understand what individually motivates people. Yet a lot of managers, like you say, are either on autopilot, their attention is elsewhere. And I think, again, that's what shifts us from training to learning and development to organizational design and development, is thinking, well, where is their attention right now? And what can we do to bring their attention back to what is actually part of their job purpose and role? And how can we support them? How can we help create the environments that let people do what it is they need to do? Because people aren't not doing it because they don't want to do it. It's that old adage, people come to work wanting to do their best work and to have their best day. I'm a big believer in that. Nobody wants to come and just sit wasting their time for 8 hours a day or longer.
And I think that's, it is that enabling function, that freeing, that allowing people to have the space to work, to, have access to the information, etc. We're not there to do it for them or to second guess. We're there to empower them to be them best selves. We don't need to be the guardians of that knowledge. We don't need to have thought everything through, but we're facilitating that ability for them to, as you said, do exactly what they want to do and do the best in their roles.
Yeah. I'd love to be able to do things for people or make them, see things as clearly sometimes as I feel that we see things. But that being impossible, I take on the second task of enabling, like you said.
Absolutely. And I know we could probably still be here, in 8 hours time talking about this subject, because we have, gone down many of these rabbit holes before, and we've got lots of ideas as to, things that could be better or different. And that's right across the industry, from how it's structured, positioned, even how people come into it. And again, I think you're talking about job roles and titles and being more ambitious in some of those things, but also more specific, and not necessarily the airy fairy titles sometimes we have that put people off, but like you said, some really purposeful but new job titles. So I'm hoping some of those will resonate with people and they think about what they're really trying to do. So I know, sort of touching upon that and leaving the industry in a better place than you found it, and that legacy is really important to you. So what are you doing to help create that legacy and to leave others able to deliver more through learning?
Yeah, I mean, one of my personal mantras is leave people feeling better. It's actually a bit longer. It's after every interaction with me. And that's a really big, ambitious goal. And I'm not perfect and I don't do it all the time. But again, I'm using that word feel because I feel when you can leave people feeling better, they'll have more confidence, they'll believe in themselves more, and they'll be able to go and do better stuff and perform better. And then I actually saw on Facebook just recently, a friend had written something like, at some point we'll all just be memories, make sure you're a pleasant one. And I don't know if that's the people pleaser in me or if it's my positivity strength, but if more people at work thought about how they were going to be remembered either after others have left the room or when they've moved on to another role, wouldn't that change how people were working and make them maybe a little bit less focused on purely tasks and that reactive stuff and more thinking that sustainability, future orientated piece? And legacy for me isn't about being remembered actually personally, but like you say, it's about leaving things in a better place than you found them. They don't have to be big things. They can be tiny little things. Having said that, I remember my friend, when I moved here, my friend Henna, she said to me, Michaela, you're going on this island that's 22 miles long, 8 miles tall. they're inviting you to stay for a little bit. How are you going to leave them better? And I was like, hey, no, I just want to cuddle cats and watch sunsets, actually, get over the hard work of the first year of COVID in the UK and take a little bit of a break. But I have been thinking on that, and I know here, one thing that I can introduce to Cayman is strengths for children in schools. So I'm a strengths coach using the Gallup Strengths Finder. And here, the thing about working in a country this size, and especially when you're working with the government, is you can generally feel the impact of the work that you're doing. So what I would love is that in the future, every single child, they goes through a strengths assessment by the time they're 12. And I think that would have such a repercussion on their self-esteem, help them when it comes to peer pressure, because those who are more confident in who they are more likely to put their hands up and say, yes, I'll do that. No, I'll not do that. And just help them find their place in the world rather than thinking, this is what I must do, thinking, well, who am I and what would work best for me? Because a lot of the time, especially in education, and I'm talking about this because I think education impacts on how people bring learning and their thoughts on learning into the workplace. A lot of it is based on how they were taught at school, right? And I feel sorry for introverts, especially because they're the ones that we always say to them as children, oh, why can't you be more outgoing? Why can't you be more like this? We need introverts. We need engineers. We need deep thinkers and architects. We need those skills. So doing the strengths from a young age can really help, I believe, those kids grow up knowing who what their personal purpose is. If you don't know your personal purpose, how can you bring that to the workplace and bring that passion and energy? Remember, it's all about learning and development. It's about helping people find their energy and putting their energy in the right place. Because then we don't have to do the work, right? We're just moving people into the right place and letting them fly with it.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, I strongly believe that too much of what we do is about almost pushing people, and it's, you push them. It's like, pushing a toy car, and it stops as soon you've pushed it, and then you have to go and push it again. Whereas, we're more like those wind-up cars that we're trying, we're trying to get someone to have their own energy and keep going and exert and create that ripple effect, because there's no way we can have the impact if we view it as a very task-focused one-on-one thing. It's more creating that culture, like you said, taking that strengths-based assessment to create a foundation for people to be more confident and apply things. And I think that's a really good way. I love the way you're thinking about that, because if people went into their organizations and thought the same thing as, how do we build the foundations that allow everyone to be empowered to be their best selves, to find their purpose, to feel energized in what they're doing, that would probably have more impact than running, a leadership development program for 40 managers who've probably sat there looking at their watch going, I've probably got some tasks to do in the business, and how relevant is this to what I'm doing anyway, which is still, unfortunately, the world so many people are caught in.
We are still getting it wrong. Engagement surveys show more people are disengaged at work than they're engaged. Ken Blanchard's quit and stayers, or now I saw, what are we calling them these days? Quiet quitters, or
quiet quitting or something.
Quiet quitting. So what I understand by that, it's people who they are actually either still in the workplace, just not doing anything, or they're just kind of drifting off, finding new things, but not making a big fuss about it. And for me, I've always spoken out, and I always want to encourage people to find their voice and speak out. I always think if you say the right thing or even if you say the wrong thing, but you're at the right time and the right person, you try your best, you bring good intent, no one's going to fire you for having an opinion. And if they do, then you probably don't want to be there anyway. And I've spoken up plenty of times and I haven't been fired yet, touch wood. So I do believe people need to speak up rather than just that quiet quitting. Ask for what you need. People aren't mind readers. And again, I don't know, we're still getting it so wrong. What is that shift, and why hasn't that shift happened yet? I don't believe any of us will be out of a job soon, because I don't think without us around to help enable and help those conversations happen, help people speak up. But I wouldn't mind if that all happened and suddenly we were made redundant, because we'd still find other things to do because we're curious and we're resourceful as professionals, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I'm hearing people think, I've heard some discussion around L&D is going to be made redundant because we're going to be replaced by generative AI or something else coming along. And, I've got my own views on that. But, this is almost thinking about how learning professionals react and respond to industry trends and fads and fashions, etc. And how do you navigate that when there's so many things that people say you should be doing, or thought leaders or trends are saying these are the 10 things that you should be thinking about as an L&D professional next year, etc. Because people are swamped with that. How do you navigate that confusion and the rapidly changing world?
Yeah, again, these are the key skills that we need. I don't think it's a new skill that we're curators of information. There is information overload, and that is, if you want to work in learning and development, that's got to be one of your top skills. I'd say curiosity and finding your way through mounds and mounds of information to find out what's relevant and what's useful and what's needed. Those are two key things we help people with all the time. In terms of AI, though, no, we're not going to be made redundant because of AI. Yes, I will get rid of some of the more boring parts of my job, is how I see it, freeing me up to do other things. Somebody gave me a stat the other day that I haven't totally validated. I don't like sharing things normally that I haven't validated, but they said during the Industrial Revolution, productivity increased in some cases by as much as 50 to 100 times. That's over the whole duration of the Industrial Revolution. And she said already AI's done more than that already, which is maybe a slight exaggeration, but I did read that Accenture, they've done a bit of a study, and they think that AI in a way shorter time span has the potential to increase productivity by 40% for many industries. And I'm using AI, I'm using ChatGPT pretty much every day now for my work. I've told my boss, I've disclosed it, by the way, just so you know, if you need me to write an intranet article on why we should do action learning, I got it to start it off for me. It just stopped me thinking, how do I put pen to page? Where do I start with? And I'm not saying it's perfect yet or that the information in there is all credible, but I've got something now that I can refine. Literally in seconds, it creates something and I can read through, I can add, I can refine stuff. And I'd rather take away the time that I might have spent writing that article and actually doing the action learning, So, my boss jokes now that I'm only working 10% of my day and I'm still delivering what he's asked for and more, because I'm offering to do stuff all the time. Oh, we need a new vision for our team. Hang on, ChatGPT can help. I'm not saying it's creating the final version, but it's creating those conversation starters that I can take into the meeting while my other colleagues are still sitting there going, oh, yeah, vision, what do I, and really trying to spend time thinking about it. I'm asking ChatGPT and then I'm talking about it. But that works for me.
I think how you approach those new technologies is a bit of a mindset thing. So, if you're precious about your craft or you're precious about sort of an element of it, then maybe you'll feel more threatened. So if you see yourself as a learning designer, or you see yourself as a, someone who polishes learning content, then maybe, unless you're working for a huge content house polishing lots of stuff, why wouldn't you, just say, actually, I've got something that is going to allow me to do those elements of my job really quickly, but I will spend more time in some of those other areas. And it was interesting, again, going back to the Learning Technologies Fair, everyone was talking about AI, but it was an overlay on the top. And I think for me, there's a few questions people should be starting with, which is, how is AI going to impact my business, firstly? Because we shouldn't be so introspective, just worrying about learning. And how's that going to impact the skills and the capabilities and culture and all of those things we've talked about? Because how do we get people to drive that productivity without it being seen as the cockroach in the corner that you're chasing around with a shoe, trying to get rid of or ignore? Because, it will get overlaid and maybe take out some of that generic, maybe not value adding pieces of work that we've spent our time doing. And like you, I use bits of tech as a starter. We're doing some marketing emails. Well, I'm not a marketeer, but I can put some stuff in there. I can tell it what I want it to do, and it gives me a starter for 10, which I then shape and polish and put my own voice onto. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But at the beginning of the conversation, you were talking about sort of diagnosis and getting back in and really understanding what it is your people need and what it is that you're there to do. interesting, I haven't seen so much talk about how the tech is going to help us to do that, or maybe the tech frees up your time to go back and do more of that stuff, because we should be working out where we add value. Because I certainly know the learning tech suppliers are just interested in pushing content out and solutions. We spend far less time on the start of that of going, are these the right solutions? So I would be spending my time back at the beginning and going, what's AI fundamentally going to change about my business? Because is AI going to change the way we do this process, the way our roles operate, the way we interact with customers, the way we do things? Because that is far more impactful on what you should be doing to support people than worrying about, is it going to polish my training content, or is it going to mean I can do something? I'm worried about plagiarism on the returns from someone submitting their management development assignment. That is not important. The other stuff, in my view, is.
Yeah. I think we need to stop looking at AI as this big thing that's going to take over, and think, okay, like you say, if this is a tool, how can it be helpful to us? And whether that's in your process mapping, your journey mapping, anything that you're doing, just thinking, where does this come in and how might it be useful? Because there's certain things we know AI can't do yet. AI, first off, is only as good as the information you put in it, right? Or the cleverness of the question you ask. So here's another key skill for us as L&D people. And I say clever questions, actually, most of them are really simple questions, aren't they? Just asking, trying to determine the real need, I guess, and being persistent on that, not just taking the first answer at face value. But AI can't do critical thinking quite as well as humans can. AI can't do diversity and inclusion or emotional intelligence quite as well yet as humans can. And the other really big thing that, do we talk about this enough within learning and development within our organizations? I'm a very value-driven person, ethics, morals, all these things. Again, artificial intelligence will struggle a bit more with those. It will equally likely still struggle with power and ego and all those other things that are probably the main reasons why most of the stuff we've been talking about today isn't happening yet. But there's a lot that AI can't do. So for learning and development, if you go back to your designer, create your content. You could get AI to review that, to start exploring what each individual, to personalize learning journeys more for people rather than having a one size fits all. But you can still add to it those elements of critical thinking, emotional intelligence. You can still put your spin on it, and you can spend more time adding that value, which for me is much more important than this is the difference between management and leadership and let's talk about the real problems of ethics in the workplace, or using technology. Let's shift on from those things.
And I think, going back to your boss joking that you're doing the same amount in 10% of time, you're not. You're probably doing far more, like you've just illustrated, of rather than producing one program, you could producing, something that's got massive personalization elements to it, so that it's more targeted, that it's better quality, and it's all of those things, and maybe touching into areas you've not had space to do because of time constraints or process constraints. And the other thing is just to recognize that, and I think this is what we're particularly bad at in learning, is taking that step back. And we had that question at the beginning: if you could start with a blank slate, what would you do differently? And I think that's a really valuable question to ask all the time, every 3 or 6 months, particularly with things like that. What we didn't know now, it's almost like you're doing a cold case murder review and go, well, we didn't know in 1908 what DNA was. Therefore, we can go back and revisit the evidence. We didn't know some of these things, and we didn't have these tools available. So if we understand what we're trying to achieve and step back and get that and go, without thinking about how we've always done it before, if we were to start now knowing what we know now, what would we do differently? And that can get you very different solutions that don't look like courses, that don't look like learning programs, that doesn't look like an online e-learning library. It looks more like some of those things you've talked about, of the social facilitator or enabler or any of those things, because we're looking at the same outcome, but we now have a whole different toolkit that is available to us. And I don't think we're very good at that. I think we think about, how can we just make the horse faster rather than go, there's a car, or so, it's that step change thinking that we really need to do.
Yeah, I learned a word for what you just described just this week: pre-mortem. So as well as post-mortem, we should be doing pre-mortems. But I have to say, I don't like the word postmortem in the workplace. So if anyone's got any better suggestions for the reviews or the pre-thinking, let me know.
Well, this can be part of the rebranding of learning, as we can come up with a whole load of different roles, maybe a whole load of different tools and explanations for the processes or thought processes we should be looking at.
Yeah. Keeping it simple, though. I'm not one for just putting words in just because, it sounds good. I used to be a brilliant debater. And then I got into learning and development and training specifically, and I really have simplified my vocabulary because I think the simpler the better. Let's be clear with what we're trying to do, right?
Absolutely agree. Now, we're not going to go on any longer trying to put the world to rights and reinvent the future. One of the things I love to do on the podcast is find out more about our guests. And we touched upon it earlier, but you've sort of been on an eclectic journey, and you've now landed in a completely different place to where you were a few years ago. So do you want to talk us through what that experience has been like of being in the Caymans?
Oh, that's a really big question, James. I came out here, honestly, with very little expectation. I think what you expect of life, it can determine how you live your life, if that makes sense. So if I have low expectations, I came out to cuddle my cats and watch sunsets, and everything else is a bonus of that. And I think probably I won't know until I've left here how much being here has really changed me, given me things to think about. I know I'm learning stuff from people here in Cayman about how they live, what island life is like. In terms of cultures, I'm discovering here how that can drive conversations or not drive conversations, because people might say something, but if you're in a coffee shop, you've got to be careful. You can't talk about other people because you don't know who's sitting behind you and who they might know. Not that you'd want to talk badly of people anyway, but it's just that kind of island culture that people are very, very careful about what they say. They don't want to, upset anybody involuntarily or otherwise. So people tend not to say as much as you might say. Here we are ranting, right, and putting the world to rights. They might not be so open to doing that here. But the culture and the welcome that you have here, did you know that, there's a lot I can talk about since I lived here. It's been 2 years. There's over 135 different nationalities here. So for a population of 75,000, that's a lot. Just over 50% of the people that live here are Caymanians. So in terms of the work that I'm doing, I've never worked in the past on a talent development program that has actually said, by the law, we must find a way to promote Caymanians over other people. In the UK, you wouldn't be able to do that. It's discrimination. But I understand that here while we're trying to protect people. So I've had some really fun projects. I've been working with the prison service to try and attract local people to want to work in a prison. So again, you might not have thought about working in a prison, but what kinds of skills might you have that might be relevant for us, and come and find out more so that we can bring in local people to work in the prison rather than having to get people from abroad where they might have had more experience. So how can we learn from people abroad to help upskill people here in Cayman so that they have their place and their purpose in their own country? So that's really got me thinking a lot about talent development and about how you're helping people with different cultures. It goes back to self-esteem for me. How can people feel that they have what it takes to grow a career in their own country? The other thing, on a more personal note, I've never felt carefree as an adult, but I came out here on a contract. I knew I had this contract to do. There's beaches, there's sunsets, there's the sea, there's friendly people. It's the culinary capital of the Caribbean. Infrastructure here is amazing. So I'm not really thinking too far ahead for the future. I'm just trying to live in the moment, understand the people that are here so that I can best serve them. That's genuinely what I'm trying to do. Whether or not I've done that, it remains to be seen, but I'm definitely enjoying working and living here right now.
It's interesting to hear you dotted through the conversation we've had, talking about that legacy, that wider impact, that almost bigger purpose beyond what many L&D roles or professions will allow you to do. So you're having that impact on community, on island life, on, like you said, looking at how you promote the people from the islands rather than everyone else from around the world who's coming to live there. I think so I think there's a whole set of different things that you're dealing with, and that must push and stretch you personally and add some more value to what you're doing, rather than, you know, just pushing the corporate profit or whatever else sometimes we end up feeling that we're doing in role. So, you know, I always try and find some legacy in what I'm doing, whether it's in the profession or, you know, developing people or community industry. So yeah, I think it's you know, great to hear that you're having that impact, and, you know, you're not looking massively into the future, but looking at what impact you can have. Even though you're not looking into the future, how long have you got there? Or you know, is this now something you want to make permanent? What's your sort of medium term plans, if you have any at all?
Well, I've just signed on for another contract, so I'm staying a while longer yet, and then taking things as it seems. Like for me, you know, I'm very much wanting to make a difference, wanting to make an impact. And if I can stay in a role, especially within my workplace, where I feel I'm able to make that impact, then that gives me motivation, energy. Why would I want to leave something like that? And it's funny because in the UK, we talk about public sector with a bit of a certain reputation. You know, try not to work in public sector. It was advice I've been given over the years. And here I am for the first time working for a government. And yes, because of the size of the island, you can feel that impact so much more. So it's definitely filling my bucket.
Fabulous. Well, Michaela, thank you for joining us today. You know, we could have literally gone on, I think, for the rest of the day, and probably through into the small hours talking about all the things we might want to talk about. But if anyone wants to connect or get in touch with you, what's the best way of them doing that?
I'm on LinkedIn, so Michaela Adams on LinkedIn under Cayman Islands Government. You should find me. If you just want to see pictures of cats and sunsets, then you can follow me on Instagram, and that's Kayla in Cayman. So you can have a little virtual holiday while you're sitting in your desk at the UK.
Fabulous. And we'll put all of those in the show notes below the podcast. Michaela, thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you, James.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.